I was certain my memory was going. That was the only explanation I had left. For months, I had been walking into rooms and forgetting why I came. Standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the coffee maker like I had never seen one before. Losing words mid-sentence. Dropping things. My doctor had run 2 panels of tests and told me my blood pressure was erratic, that we needed to adjust my medication, that this kind of cognitive fog was sometimes a side effect of getting older. I was 64 years old. I had spent 22 years as a firefighter in Columbus, Ohio, and I had always been sharp, alert, the kind of man who remembered every face, every address, every detail. Now I was writing my own name on sticky notes and leaving them on the refrigerator door. I blamed myself. I blamed grief. I blamed the retirement that had come too early after the injury to my left knee on a call in 2019. I blamed the quiet of the house, the way silence had a sound of its own after my wife Margaret passed in 2021. I blamed everything except the one thing I never would have thought to blame, because it came from inside my own family. My son Daniel is 41 years old. He works in logistics management for a distribution company based in Indianapolis, which means he travels. A lot. I used to understand that. I used to tell myself that he was busy building a life, that his generation had different pressures, that I should not expect the same closeness that Margaret and I had always hoped for. His wife Nicole had been in the picture for 11 years. They had 1 daughter together, my granddaughter Sophie, who was 9 years old and the single greatest light in my life since the day she was born. Sophie was the kind of child who noticed things, not in a loud way. She was not the girl who ran into rooms announcing herself. She was quiet in the way that deep water is quiet still on the surface, and moving with purpose underneath. She loved birds and could name dozens of species by their calls alone. She kept a journal with a green cover that she carried everywhere. She asked questions that made adults pause, the kind of questions that made you realize a 9-year-old had been paying attention to things you assumed went over her head. Nicole did not appreciate that quality in her daughter. I had noticed that for years. The way you notice a small crack in a wall and tell yourself it is nothing. Nicole was sharp with Sophie in a particular way. A dismissive sharpness, the kind that does not raise its voice but still cuts. When Sophie would say something observant at the dinner table, Nicole would redirect the conversation without acknowledging it. When Sophie would bring me drawings or describe something she had seen at school, Nicole would find a reason to move them along. Sophie exaggerates, she told me once. When Sophie was 6 years old and describing something she had seen Nicole do with my mail, I remember thinking that was an odd way to talk about your own first grader. Daniel never pushed back. Daniel never pushed back on much. In the spring of last year, Daniel and Nicole told me they were taking a 10-day trip to Portugal, a late anniversary celebration. Their neighbor would watch their dog, and they were going to bring Sophie to stay with me, which I welcomed without hesitation. 10 days with my granddaughter in the house I had lived in for 31 years, the house where Daniel himself had grown up, where Margaret's garden still bloomed every May along the back fence. I was already planning what we would cook together, what trails we might walk, whether we could finally finish the puzzle of the American national parks that we had started at Christmas. They arrived on a Friday evening. Nicole carried Sophie's bag in and set it by the stairs with the efficiency of someone dropping off a package. She went through the instructions quickly, Sophie's school schedule, her allergy medication, bedtime at 9, no screens after 8. She did not hug Sophie when she left. She kissed her on top of the head in a way that looked like something you would do for a photograph. Daniel hugged me at the door and told me to call if I needed anything. And then they were in the car and the car was gone. Sophie stood in the entryway for a moment after the taillights disappeared down the road. Then she turned around and looked at me, and something in her face shifted. Not dramatically. It was subtle, the way a held breath releases. Like a muscle that had been clenched for a long time was finally allowed to loosen. She said, "Grandpa, can I show you something?" I told her of course she could. I assumed she meant a drawing, or something on her tablet, or maybe the new bird identification app she had mentioned on the phone last month. She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out an old iPad. Not her regular one. This was smaller, the screen scratched along one corner. A case I did not recognize. She held it against her chest with both hands and looked up at me with an expression I had not seen on a 9-year-old face before, or at least not one pointed at me. It was the expression of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was finally deciding to put it down. She said, "Mom doesn't know I have this. I found it in the closet in the guest room at our house. I charged it when she wasn't home. She paused. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I didn't know if you'd believe me. She always says I make things up. I sat down on the bottom stair so that I was at her level. I told her to sit beside me, and she did. I told her that I was listening, and that she did not need to be afraid, and that whatever she wanted to show me or tell me, I was not going anywhere. She unlocked the iPad and opened the photo app. Then she handed it to me. There were 11 videos, short ones, most of them under 2 minutes. The timestamps on the videos spanned 4 months. I pressed play on the first one. The angle was low and slightly tilted, the way a camera looks when it has been propped against something small on a shelf. I recognized the background immediately. It was my bathroom upstairs, the one off the master bedroom that I had shared with Margaret and still used every morning. The medicine cabinet above the sink was open in the frame, and Nicole was standing in front of it. She was holding my blood pressure medication, the orange prescription bottle with my name on the white label, and she was doing something with it that I did not immediately understand. She had a second bottle, smaller, without a label, and she was counting small white pills from the unlabeled bottle into her palm, then opening my prescription bottle and dropping them in. She was calm, methodical. She was wearing latex gloves. I watched her close my prescription bottle, put it back exactly where it had been, close the medicine cabinet, pull off the gloves and tuck them into her jacket pocket, and leave the bathroom. The whole thing took 90 seconds. I did not press play on the second video for almost a full minute. Sophie was watching my face. She had her knees pulled up to her chest on the stair beside me, and her green journal was open in her lap, and she had a pencil in her hand, but she was not writing anything. She was just watching me. I asked her when she had taken these videos. She told me she had started in January. She said she had come to visit me with her parents one weekend and had forgotten her tablet in my bathroom, and when she went to get it, she had seen her mother in there, and her mother had not heard her come in, and she had backed away before Nicole turned around. She said she had gone back to the guest room and sat on the bed and thought about it for a long time. She said she did not fully understand what she had seen, but she knew it did not look right. She said she had gone back home that night and looked up my medication online. She had read about what happens when you take too much of it. She had read words like hypotension and bradycardia and renal failure. She had read that in elderly patients, a sustained overdose could present as cognitive decline, as confusion, as fatigue, as memory loss. She was 9 years old. She had done this research on the school library computer because she did not want to use the home Wi-Fi. She said, "Grandpa, I think that's why you've been forgetting things. I think that's why you got so tired at Christmas." I pressed play on the second video, and then the third, and the fourth. Over 4 months, Nicole had come into my home on 6 separate occasions, always when I was in another part of the house, always brief, always the same routine. The last video was dated 3 weeks ago. I sat on that stair for a long time after watching the last one. The house was quiet. Outside, a cardinal was calling from the direction of Margaret's garden. Sophie had put her hand in mine at some point, and I had not noticed until just then, and when I did, I held it tightly. I am not a man who cries easily. I spent 2 decades running into burning buildings for a living. I held Margaret's hand in a hospital room for 6 days before she passed, and I did not break until the car ride home when I was alone. But sitting on those stairs with my granddaughter's hand in mine and the weight of what I had just watched pressing down on every part of my chest, I felt something give way inside me that I could not stop. Sophie did not say anything. She just tightened her hand around mine and leaned her head against my arm. After a while, I asked her if she had told anyone else. She shook her head. She said she had tried to tell her father once, in a general way, saying she thought something was strange about Mom's visits to my house. She said he had told her that she was imagining things, that she needed to stop inventing drama, that this was exactly what her teacher, Mrs. Calloway, had been talking about when she said Sophie needed to work on separating fact from imagination. She said it carefully, the way a child says a thing they have memorized because they needed to remember it exactly right. And then she looked at me and said, "But I wasn't imagining it, Grandpa. I have the videos." I told her she was the bravest person I had ever known. I meant it more completely than I have ever meant anything. We did not call anyone that night. I needed to think clearly, and I knew that I had not been thinking clearly for months, not because of grief or age, but because of what was in my pill bottle. The first thing I did the following morning, while Sophie was still asleep, was take my medication bottle and put it in a Ziploc bag and place it on the highest shelf in the garage. Then I called my doctor's office when they opened and told them I needed to come in urgently and that I believed my medication had been tampered with. My doctor is a woman named Dr. Hargrove who has been practicing for 30 years. She did not treat me like I was paranoid. She took blood immediately and told me to come back in 2 days. She also told me to bring the bottle. Then I called my brother-in-law, Gary, who had been a detective with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office for 26 years before he retired. I told him what Sophie had found. I told him about the videos. He was quiet for a moment, the professional kind of quiet that means a mind is moving fast. And then he told me not to touch anything else in the house and to make digital copies of every video immediately and to email them to him as well as to store them on a separate device. He also told me to call an attorney. I called Raymond Park, who had handled Margaret's estate. I reached him at his office before lunch, and I sent him the videos that afternoon, and he told me that what I had was significant and that I needed to let the proper authorities handle it from here. The hardest part of those next 4 days was acting normally. Sophie was extraordinary. She is 9 years old and she kept her composure better than most adults I know. She went to school, she ate breakfast, she worked on the National Parks puzzle with me in the evenings. She called her father on the second night of the trip, as Nicole had instructed, and reported that she was having a wonderful time and that everything was fine. She looked at me when she said it, across the kitchen table, and she gave me a small, steady nod. I thought about what Nicole had been doing and why. The house I live in is paid off and worth just over $400,000. When Margaret and I had updated our will in 2018, everything passed to Daniel, with the understanding that he and Sophie would be provided for. My life insurance policy, which I had maintained since my firefighting days, was just over $500,000 with Daniel as the sole beneficiary, nearly $1 million in total, all of it flowing in one direction. I thought about what Dr. Hargrove had told me at my follow-up appointment when the lab results came back. She sat across from me in her office with the folder open and she spoke carefully, the way doctors do when they are telling you something serious. The concentration of the compound in my blood was consistent with a sustained overdose over several months. The cognitive symptoms I had been experiencing, the memory lapses, the confusion, the fatigue were almost certainly medication-induced, and not the beginning of dementia, as we had feared. She said that if this had continued for another 6 to 12 months without detection, the cumulative effect on my cardiovascular system would have been severe. She used the word catastrophic. She said that stopping the tampered medication when I did was the most important thing that could have happened. She also said, quietly, that at the rate things had been going, it was unlikely I would have survived another winter. Sophie had not just saved me from a difficult few years. Sophie had saved my life. The investigation moved quickly once Gary connected me with a detective named Reyes at the county sheriff's office. The videos were clear. The forensic evidence from the pill bottle was unambiguous, and the unlabeled pills Nicole had been adding to my prescription were identified as a high-potency antihypertensive not prescribed to anyone in our family. Tracing the source took 2 weeks and ultimately led back to an online pharmacy operating out of a state with looser prescription oversight. Nicole and Daniel were still in Portugal when Detective Reyes first reached out to Daniel by phone. I was told that Daniel's initial response was disbelief, then denial, then something that the detective described to me later as a prolonged silence. By the time they landed back in the United States, there were 2 officers waiting at the gate. Nicole was arrested at the airport. Daniel was taken in for questioning separately. I was not there. I was at home with Sophie, who sat on the back porch with her binoculars and her journal and watched the feeders in Margaret's garden while I sat beside her and tried to find the right words to tell her what was happening with her parents. There are no right words for that conversation. I do not think there ever will be. I told her as plainly and gently as I could, and I told her that none of it was her fault and none of it would ever be her fault. And I told her that I loved her more than anything in the world. She put down her binoculars and thought for a moment. Then she said, "Is Dad going to be okay?" I told her I hoped so. I told her that was all I knew how to say right now. She nodded slowly and picked up her binoculars again and went back to watching the birds. What followed over the next several months was the particular kind of difficult that comes not from dramatic events but from the slow, grinding work of legal proceedings and family fracture and the adjustments that have to be made when the shape of your life changes permanently. Nicole was charged with criminal poisoning and attempted murder in the first degree. After months of legal proceedings, she accepted a plea arrangement that resulted in a sentence of 11 years in a state correctional facility. She will be eligible for parole review after serving 8. Her attorney argued for leniency based on her role as a primary caregiver and the absence of a prior record. The judge was not moved. Daniel pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment. Based on his failure to report concerns, he later admitted he had harbored but dismissed. He did not know the full extent of what Nicole had done. But he knew something was wrong, and he looked away, and a court determined that looking away had consequences. He received 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a mandatory participation in a family counseling program. He lost his job when the news became public. He called me from a friend's house 6 weeks after the sentencing. It was a Sunday afternoon in November, and I was raking leaves in the backyard, and my phone rang, and I saw his name, and I sat down on the cold steps of the back porch and answered. He did not say very much. He said he was sorry. He said it several times in several ways, and none of them sounded like enough, and I think he knew that. I did not say much either. I told him I was not ready to have a longer conversation yet. I told him I was glad he called. I asked him if he had spoken to Sophie. He said not yet. He said he did not know how. I told him that was a conversation he was going to have to find a way to have, and that the longer he waited, the harder it would get, and that his daughter had shown more courage in the past year than either of us had, and she deserved to hear from her father. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She really filmed all of it herself?" I told him she had. I told him she had researched my medication on a school library computer because she was worried about me and did not know who to trust. He made a sound on the phone that I recognized. I had made the same sound sitting on my own stairs 4 months earlier. I told him I would be in touch and that I needed more time, and we ended the call. Sophie has been living with me since October. The family court process is ongoing, but given the circumstances, temporary guardianship was straightforward. Her bedroom is the one at the top of the stairs, the one that was Daniel's when he was a boy and that Margaret had repainted yellow when Sophie was a toddler because Sophie had once called it her sunshine room. There is a bird feeder outside the window that Sophie picked out herself at the hardware store, a tube feeder that attracts goldfinches and chickadees and the occasional rose-breasted grosbeak, which Sophie documented in her journal with a detailed sketch the first time it appeared. She is doing well. That is the answer I give when people ask, and it is the true answer, though it is also an incomplete one. She has good days and complicated days. She has a therapist she sees on Thursdays named Dr. Osei, and she likes her, and she talks about the sessions sometimes and does not talk about them other times, and I have learned to follow her lead. Her grades at school are strong. She made a friend this semester named Priya who comes over on Saturdays sometimes, and the two of them spend hours on things I do not fully understand, involving colored pencils and elaborate fictional worlds they are building together. She laughs at dinner. Real laughing. The kind that fills a room. My own health has been recovering steadily since stopping the tampered medication and working with Dr. Hargrove to recalibrate my actual prescription. The cognitive fog has lifted in a way that is almost disorienting after months of living inside it. I remember things again. I finish sentences. I drove to the hardware store last week and came back with exactly what I went for and nothing else, which felt like a minor miracle. I had a long conversation with Dr. Hargrove 2 months ago about everything that had happened, and at the end of it, she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said that in her experience, patients who survive a sustained attempt on their lives often spend a long time waiting to feel whole again, and that what she had observed was that wholeness does not come all at once. It comes in increments. In mornings where the light comes through the kitchen window at the right angle. In a meal that turns out better than you expected. In the particular quality of silence that is peaceful rather than lonely. I know what she means now. This past Thanksgiving was the first one in this house without Margaret. It was also the first one without Daniel sitting at the table. But Sophie and I cooked together for the first time. She handled the green beans and took the task so seriously that she cross-referenced 2 recipes and made a chart. Gary and his wife, Ellen, came with their adult kids, and there was noise and spilled cider and a long argument about football teams that nobody resolved, and it was wonderful in a way that I felt in my chest. After dinner, when the others had moved to the living room, Sophie and I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes together. She was standing on the step stool that has been in this kitchen since Daniel was small, and the radio was playing something quiet, and outside the window the yard was dark and still. She said, without looking up from the dish she was drying, "Grandpa, are you happy?" I thought about it for a real moment, because she deserved a real answer and not just the automatic one. I told her that I was getting there, that I was happier than I had been in a long time, and that I expected to keep going in that direction, and that a significant part of the reason for that was standing right next to me on a step stool, arguing with a dish towel. She smiled at that, not the polite smile, but the real one, the one that reaches her eyes. I have spent a lot of time in the months since all of this happened thinking about how close I came to not being here. Not in a morbid way, but in the honest way that surviving something forces you to think. I think about the version of events where Sophie never found that old iPad in the guest room closet, where she found it but was too frightened or too discouraged by years of being told she imagined things to do anything with it, where I had kept taking what was in that pill bottle through another winter and another spring and eventually had not woken up one morning, and it had been recorded as natural causes, and no one had ever known. And then I think about Sophie standing in my bathroom doorway in January, seeing something that did not look right, and backing away quietly, and sitting on the edge of a guest room bed, and deciding at 9 years old, alone, without any adult telling her it was the right thing to do to pick up an old iPad and press record. I have known brave people in my life. I spent 22 years working alongside them. I have seen men and women run toward things that every instinct says to run from. I know what courage looks like from close range. I have never seen it in a purer form than in a 9-year-old girl who was told her whole life that she imagined things and who kept watching anyway and kept her green journal and waited for the right moment and trusted me enough to show me the truth. People ask me sometimes what I would want others to take from all of this. I am not naturally a person who tries to turn his own experience into a lesson for strangers. But if there is one thing I come back to, it is this. Pay attention to the children in your life who seem to notice more than they are supposed to. The quiet ones. The ones who are labeled difficult or dramatic or prone to exaggeration. The ones who ask questions that make adults uncomfortable. More often than not, those children are not imagining things. They are just paying attention in a world that keeps telling them not to. Listen to them. Sophie came to me with the truth because I had always listened to her. Not perfectly. Not as well as I could have. But enough that when it mattered most, she knew I would not send her away. That is the only thing I did right in this entire story, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure I keep doing it. The National Parks puzzle is finished now. It took us the better part of 2 weeks, working in the evenings after dinner, and when we put the last piece in, Sophie photographed it before we took it apart and printed the photograph at the drugstore and taped it to the inside of the cabinet above the kitchen counter where I will see it every morning. It is still there. I see it every morning. I do not take that for granted.